I wholly recognize how hypocritical that this can sound the day after saying, don't rush to judgment after the first round of the expanded college football playoff. But I do think there's one big takeaway and one big change that needs to be made for the college football playoff in a 12-team era. And I don't know who can argue against it or what can be argued against it that would make you say, well, it's got to stay the way it is right now. And I think it's the seating. If you look at the seating, and I guess it's not the seating, it's the bracketing. That we like brackets, right? Like it's half the reason that March Madness is fun and interesting is you like drawing that path from the number 9 seed that nobody thinks is going to win their first round game to the Final Four. It's part of the fun. But I don't know that brackets are going to catch on in the college football playoff. I just don't think we're ever going to see it. I think people like to fill out a bracket one time a year because the NHL has tried to make the Stanley Cup playoffs like, oh, fill out your bracket, do the bracket challenge. And it's never caught on. NASCAR has done a similar situation where they do like a midseason tournament bracket. Nobody fills out a NASCAR bracket. At the end of the day, nobody fills out an NFL bracket. No matter who tries to do it, March Madness has the bracket corner covered. So I don't think brackets are a huge deal for the college football playoff. And so when you look at the bracket, I don't think there should be a bracket. I think they should reseed the college football playoff definitely after the first round, and you could argue after the second round into the semifinals. Because when you look at this bracket, Oregon is the number 1 overall seed. Oregon won the Big Ten. Oregon went undefeated. Should Oregon have to play the number 6 team in the country while the number 5 team in the country plays the number 12 seed in the country, while the number 6 seed gets to play the number 9 team? It's a mess. It's a disaster. If you're the number 1 seed, you should get the advantage because you have earned the advantage. You have earned being viewed as the best team in college football. So once we get past the first round, Oregon should have the easiest path to the semifinals, and they don't. Undeniably, they don't. By college football playoff metric, by whoever you want to talk about it, however you want to decide it, Oregon has arguably the most difficult path to the national championship game and likely has the most difficult path to the semifinals. The number 1 team in the country, and I'm not, again, hypocritical. I'm not a big fan of utilizing Vegas point spreads to decide, as a point of reference for your argument of why who should or shouldn't be in the playoff, et cetera, or whatever. Oregon's the number 1 team in America. They have earned that right. Went 13-0, won the Big Ten, unanimous number 1. Their semifinal or their quarterfinal game should not put them as an underdog in the Vegas point spreads. Oregon should not be a 1.5-point dog as the number 1 team in the country in their first college football playoff game. I think you can make the argument about whether or not this next round of the college football playoff should also be on on-campus sites. I think you can absolutely have that question, have that conversation. And I don't know that I have a strong feeling one way or another. I would lean towards, hey, if the teams who didn't earn a bye got a playoff game, then naturally the teams that did earn a bye, the teams that won their conferences, they deserve a home playoff game too. I don't think that's a ridiculous sentiment to have. I think you could argue that point and it not be really far-fetched. But I also think that if you've earned that right to not only host a home playoff game after a bye, the number one team at least should have earned the right to then have the easiest path to the semifinals and therefore the finals. I think maybe once you get to this round and you set it, you say, hey, it is now Oregon versus Arizona State. It is now Georgia versus Boise State. It is now Texas versus Ohio State. And it is now Penn State versus Notre Dame. One, it makes those games better, more interesting, at least this year. It makes the quarterfinal games better, more interesting, and you are not taking the chance of, because I think we got to a point where the conferences say we need the conference championship games to matter. So the conference championship games matter in this iteration of the college football playoff. But I don't think they thought of, okay, what does this then look like if we are in a scenario where, like this year, Arizona State wins the Big 12. They are the fourth highest ranked conference champion, but we view them as the 12th best team in the country. We view them as the 12th best team in America. Should the 12th best team in America have an easier, quote unquote, easier path to the semifinals than the number one team in the country? No, they shouldn't. And I don't think that there's a way to argue any differently. So that is, to me, the one kind of glaring, like, hey, you think, essentially, you have on one side of the bracket three of what I think you would, if you asked the College Football Playoff Committee, three of the four best teams remaining in the field are on one side of the bracket, where Ohio State, Oregon, Texas are on one side. And I think that they would tell you that they feel really strongly that Notre Dame is really good. And I think Notre Dame, we'll talk about this later. I think Notre Dame has a really, really, really good chance to beat Georgia. And I think Notre Dame has a really good chance to beat whoever the hell wins Boise State, Penn State. I think there's a strong chance Notre Dame plays for a national championship. But we'll talk about that further on down the line. But as it sits right now, three of the four best teams remaining are on one side of the bracket, and one of them ain't going to make it out. Meanwhile, you're giving, I can't say preferential treatment, because it's not preferential treatment. It's just the way the bracket shook out. But Boise State has a chance to make the semifinals, when I don't think Boise State would tell you that they're on the same level as Ohio State, Oregon. I don't think the College Football Playoff could tell you that they're on the same level as Ohio State and Oregon. And yet those two teams are going to meet each other in the quarterfinals. I just think overall, top to bottom, does the current system value winning? Does it place a high importance on being the number one overall seed? And the answer to that is unequivocally no. There should be more advantage for being the number one seed than simply not playing in the first round. So maybe I could get on board with either it's rebracketed in favor of the number one seed, or the quarterfinals also take place at a home stadium. There needs to be a bigger advantage. There needs to be a bigger incentive to being the number one overall seed than simply you get a week off. Because it's that way in like in the NFL. If you're the number one seed, not only do you not play the first weekend, and right now the way the NFL playoffs are set up, you're the only one not playing, but then you have home field advantage. So there are two big incentives for being the number one overall seed. And right now in the college football playoff, there's one. You get a bye. And that's after you've played an extra game, by definition, than virtually everybody else in the field. So, number one seed either deserves a home playoff game or rebracketing. And I don't know that you can argue against that. I don't know whether it's procedurally, whether it's logistically. I don't think that there's an argument against that. If there is, let me know in the comments down below, because I'd love to have that conversation. I'd love to see that whole picture. If I'm not seeing it right now, I'd love to have your perspective too. So hit me in the comments below if you think, well, here's the reason why it can't be that way. But from my standpoint right now, I don't see why it can't. And so I think that change needs to be made going forward without a shadow of a doubt. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.